Ramesh in conversation with Sukanya Das. Uh, I'm sure you all know Jairam sir, and he doesn't need any introduction, but I'll just read it out a couple of lines. Mr. Ramesh is an Indian economist, historian, and politician, and a Rajya Sabha member of the parliament from Karnataka. He held the portfolios of rural development and drinking water and sanitation. Sir is going to be talking about his book, about a poem that defined the Buddha. If I can please invite Sir on stage, please. And he'll be in conversation with Sukanya Das, who's a member of Team Game Plan. A round of applause, please, to welcome our guests on stage. Over to you, Sukanya.
Good evening. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for being here. We are today going to be part of a session with one of India's most respected and loved biographers. But there is a difference. Today we won't be talking about a biography of an individual. Instead, we will be talking about the biography of a poem. You heard that right, a poem. The biography that we are talking about is about the life of Asia, a poem written by Edwin Arnold and published in 1879, sir? In 1879. So my first question to Mr. Ramesh is, why a biography of a poem? Does it merit a biography?
Well, working? Yeah. Well, this is an epic poem on the life of the Buddha that was published in 1879. And in the 19th century, nobody knew who Buddha was. People had forgotten who Buddha was. People had forgotten a faith called Buddhism that had been embraced by all of Asia. Particularly in India, the memory of Buddha had got forgotten. And this poem gets published in 1879, and it becomes a sensation. To use today's language, it goes viral. It goes viral in America, it goes viral in Europe, it goes viral in India. And if you look at the history of Buddhism, if you look at the knowledge of the life of the Buddha, this poem is a very critical milestone. Its publication first in English, and then its translation into 30 different languages of the world, including 12 languages in the Indian subcontinent itself. So it's a poem that, it's like the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita is set in the form of a poem. It's, sort of verses. This is an epic poem in a typical English style. And I thought, rather than doing a biography of an individual, which is what biographies are, I do the biography of this poem, and also within the biography of the poem, embed the biography of the poet. So this is a book on the poem and the poet, because the poet, as we will discuss, is very important, not just as an English personality, but also as somebody who spent time in India and was a translator of the Geet Govinda, of the Hitopadesha, of the Mahabharata, and most importantly, the translator of the Bhagavad Gita in 1885, which became a very important and abiding text for Mahatma Gandhi.
Yes. So, when we read the book, an epic poem, you said 5,600 lines.
50,000 lines.
50,000 lines. Okay. So, we'll usually, when a poem has so much of impact or a written word has so much of impact, there is influence, there is literary merit, and there is subject. We'll take literary merit as a given. Uh, what about the subject? It is a retelling of the Buddha story, as you told us, but in the 19th century, archaeologists found evidence of the historical Buddha, and that was the start of, let's say, rediscovering the Buddha in a way. But it is this poem that is credited with spreading awareness and interest in the Buddha.
Well, in many ways, the 19th century helped define India. It helped define who Indians are. The modern discovery of Hinduism, the modern discovery of Jainism, the modern discovery of Buddhism, all takes place in the 19th century. It's the textual discovery, it's the archaeological discovery, it's the cultural discovery. And Buddha became a sensation all over the world. Remember, this is the late 19th century we are talking about. This is a time when Charles Darwin's book has hit the headlines. This is a time when there is growing disenchantment with the organized church. There's a growing disenchantment with Christianity, the dogma of Christianity. And there is this great desire for discovering a figure of morality, a figure of ethics, a figure who will give you a sense of moral support at a time of profound economic and technological change. So people were looking for something. There was an appetite for a Buddha-like figure. And Buddha emerged from archaeology, Buddha emerged from the texts, and finally Buddha emerged in this poem. Every Indian is a Buddhist. Buddha is part of the DNA of every Indian. We tend to take Buddha for granted. And is one of the extraordinary things about India is Buddhism has disappeared from India, but Buddha hasn't. I think in everybody's home, in the drawing room or in the bedroom, somewhere there'll be some icon of Buddha. There'll be a calendar, there'll be a stone image, or there'll be some painting of the Buddha in everybody's home. But that's what Buddha is, who Buddha is. He's part of our lives, even though Buddhism is no longer a vibrant, living force in India.
It is interesting that you say that, and yes, it is true, the Buddha remains a part of our lives, but there was this gentleman I was talking to a few days back, and I was telling him about this session we are doing, and he said, well, there's just one reason for the disappearance of Buddhism as an established religion or something followed by people in India. It's because Buddhism is absolutely the antithesis of the Indian psyche. And what you said is, what do you have to say to this?
That's completely wrong. The two pillars of modern Hindu philosophy, ahimsa and karuna. Ahimsa comes from Jainism. Karuna comes from Buddhism. Modern Hinduism is defined by the interplay of ancient Vedic religion, Jain thought, and Buddhist philosophy. So it's a complete conglomerate of different philosophies. And it's interesting, up to the 8th century, Buddhism was very much a living faith, a day-to-day faith. But by the 8th century, it begins to fade out in India because it becomes absorbed in mainstream Vaishnavite philosophy. Buddha becomes the 9th avatar of Vishnu. There is a Dashavatara. There are 10 avatars of Vishnu, and Buddha becomes the 9th avatar of Vishnu. So the Brahmins had appropriated Buddha into the pantheon of Hindu gods and avatars. Matsya, Kurma, Varaha, Narasimha, Vamana, Balarama, Rama, Buddha, and Kalki. So that's one of the reasons why Buddhism disappeared. But Buddhism disappeared only in India, not in Sri Lanka, not in Burma, not in Japan, not in Korea, and certainly not in China. So when you go across Asia, and that's why Edwin Arnold called this poem The Light of Asia. When you go across Asia, you find Buddha a living presence. Buddhism may not be a living presence in India. Even in Pakistan, some of the greatest Buddhist excavations have taken place around Takshila and Peshawar in what was then called Gandhara. Modern Afghanistan, you all read of the Bamia Buddhas. Modern Afghanistan was defined by the embracing of the Buddhist faith. So Buddha became, in many ways, the greatest exporter from India in the last 2000 years. Other than software, before software exports, we had Buddha and Buddhist philosophy.
So coming back to the Infosys of the 19th century.
Well, he was in many ways, the Infosys of the 3rd century BC.
Here, Infosys of the 19th century would be Edwin Arnold, let's say, if he's taking Buddha to the world at that point. This poem is said to have influenced and moved people as diverse as the nurse Florence Nightingale, politician and statesman Winston Churchill, business tycoon Andrew Carnegie, writer Herman Melville, and scientist J. Robert Oppenheimer. What is it in the poem that reaches out to so many people and influences so many people?
The poem became a sensation because of the subject. The poem does not have great literary merit, but because it deals with the life of Buddha. So it's very important. This poem is not on Buddha, the divine figure. This is a poem on Buddha, the human figure. It deals with the humanity of Buddha. It doesn't deal with the divinity of Buddha. And people in the 19th century were fed up with divinity. And they were looking for a figure of humanity. They were looking for a figure who did not claim that he was God. Remember, Buddha never said he is God. Buddha never said, I am a mokshadata. Buddha only said, I am a margadata. I am only showing you the path. I am not a God. Don't believe in me. Find your own truth. Find your own enlightenment. Be your own light. Be your own lamp. That's what Buddha tells Ananda in his discourse before he dies. So I think that's what appealed to a lot of people in the West. People were fed up with the church. People were disenchanted with organized ritual. People were very, very skeptical of the Bible and biblical stories. And people were looking for something beyond religion. They were looking for a figure of morality, a figure of ethics. And here was Buddha, who preached a philosophy which said, be in the world, but not of the world. And I think that's what really led a lot of cultural personalities, a lot of scientists, a lot of intellectuals, a lot of journalists, a lot of people in Western countries initially to embrace Buddha as a figure in the late 19th century and the early part of the 20th century.
I want to ask you this question. I'll come to Indian figures who were influenced by this poem a little later. But when you talk of the poem being received as sort of like this hope, this kind of antithesis to the dogma, the doctrine, whatever. What about the attacks, apart from the fact that the poem attracted a lot of people, moved a lot of people, touched a lot of people? There were also quite a few pretty vicious attacks, and mostly by theologists, if I'm not wrong.
The church attacked Arnold. The organized church, the missionaries, the Catholic missionaries, the Protestant missionaries, they attacked Arnold because they saw Buddha as a threat to Christ. They saw Buddha, they saw Christians getting converted to Buddhism, and they saw the growing power of the Buddha. And this is, part of the attacks in the late 19th century, which Vivekananda had to face, because people were being attracted to Hindu belief. People were being attracted to Vedanta. This happens after Vivekananda's famous visit to Chicago in 1893. So this is part of that phenomenon when Buddha is seen to be a threat to the power of organized Christianity. But I think by then, people were not taken in. And Buddha became a figure of great appeal. First of all, the image of the Buddha, you know, the calm, serene, contemplative, meditative figure, which we are all used to. That itself, looking at Buddha makes you, in many ways, you know, if your blood is boiling and if you're agitated, you just have to look at the figure of the Buddha and you'll cool down immediately. So there's something about the figure of the Buddha.
I have
So
to
I
ask
think
you
what
this.
happened was the more people attacked Buddha, the more popular he became. And that's how Buddha became part of the Western culture in the early part of the 20th century.
I have to ask you this. You did say, and it's very true, that there is, a Buddha idol or a statue. No, idol is not the right word. Somewhere in all of our homes. What about in the Rajya Sabha? Any?
You know, Buddha permeates. Look at the national symbol of India. Look at the national symbol of India. Is the four lions. Now that four lions was excavated in Sarnath. That's Ashoka's lion capital. Look at our national flag. What is in the center of the national flag? It's the Dharma Chakra, the 24-spoke Dharma Chakra. This is a symbol, again, of Ashoka. And Ashoka, as we know, converted to Buddhism and became the great champion of Buddhist faith. So modern India has embraced Buddhist symbols because Tagore, Gandhi, Nehru, Ambedkar, Patel, this whole generation of founding fathers saw in Buddha as a symbol of the superiority of Indian culture, of Indian philosophy, of the Indian way of thought. And Buddha became this great emancipator. For Ambedkar, for example, Buddha, the last book that Ambedkar wrote, and which was published a few months after Ambedkar died in December of 1956, was called the Buddha and His Dhamma. And as you know, one of the last public acts of Dr. Ambedkar in October 1956 was his mass conversion. He, along with almost 3 lakh of his followers, converted to Buddhism in Nagpur. So Buddha was very much part of our national movement. So whether it was Tagore, whether it was Gandhi, whether it was Nehru, whether it was Ambedkar, people were influenced by Buddha. And by incidentally, I must say, that this knowledge of the Buddha came from reading of Arnold's poem.
Yes, that is what I was going to ask.
Gandhi's knowledge of Buddha, Vivekananda's knowledge of Buddha, Tagore's knowledge of Buddha, Nehru's knowledge of Buddha, Ambedkar's knowledge of Buddha, all came from the reading of this poem, either in English, and by the 1930s, this poem had been translated into Bengali, into Tamil, into Kannada, into Malayalam, into Hindi, into Punjabi, into all major Indian languages. So by 1920 or 1930, Buddha is seen by one section of the Indian national movement, namely Tagore, Gandhi, Nehru, as a symbol of Indian culture, as a symbol of Indian thought, and he's also seen by another stream of the Indian movement, namely Dr. Ambedkar and so on, as a symbol of social reform, as a symbol of social protest, and as a symbol of somebody who fought against the caste system.
Social protest.
Yes, because to a large number of people, Buddha represents social reform because he was a voice who cried out against Vedic orthodoxy. He propounded a new system of faith which did not believe in animal sacrifice. He accepted drinking water from whom we call untouchables, who were then considered to be untouchables. And so Buddha became, although on one thing Buddha was not a great social reformer, I should say.
Yes.
He did not admit women
Yes.
into the Sangha. the Buddhist Sangha was not open to women. So he was not a great believer in gender justice. Day after tomorrow is International Women's Day. We'll remember many people, but certainly Buddha was not a great reformer when it came to women. And Buddha was finally persuaded to admit women into the Sangha because of his main disciple Ananda and his stepmother, who's also his aunt, Mahaprajapati. She becomes the first Buddhist nun. So, but on caste, Buddha was perhaps the earliest social reformer, and that's why to people like Dharmanand Kosambi, people like Dr. Ambedkar, and even today, all the young Ambedkarite Dalit movements, for them, the symbol, the icon is Buddha.
Okay. One of, you mentioned animal sacrifice and vegetarianism. The poem also, and Edwin Arnold specifically, I think was somebody who spoke out about vegetarianism, and that itself also had an impact on Gandhiji. Is there a relationship there?
Well, you know, Edwin Arnold comes to India in 1858, and he was principal of Deccan College in Pune. He quickly learns Sanskrit, he quickly learns Marathi. He's obviously got a gift for languages. And he then begins the process of translation of the Indian epics, of the Indian works, Mahabharata, Gita Govinda, Hitopadesha, and as I said, the Bhagavad Gita. So he's an unusual figure. He believes in British rule in India. He's not a great political revolutionary. He does not believe in political freedom for India. But he's a great student and a great admirer of Indian civilization. And therefore he ends up translating all the great Sanskrit works into English. And through his translations, those works get translated into other Indian languages. So it's extraordinary. Sanskrit gets translated into English, and then English gets translated into Bengali, Marathi, Punjabi, Sindhi, Malayalam, and so on. So this is the, you know, India has been a circulatory civilization. Things have gone out of India and come back to India. And the knowledge of the Buddha is one example. That it goes out, the Englishman popularizes it. Not just Arnold, there were other people like Alexander Cunningham and James Prinsep and Max Muller. They popularized the idea of the Buddha, and then it comes back to India in various Indian languages.
Very interesting. There was one more thing that I read in the book, that Edwin Arnold's persistence, I mean, he was one of the first to raise the issue of the Mahabodhi temple in Bodh Gaya, which is very important.
Very,
in
very
this region.
important. You know, Mahabodhi temple, after this book was published, I got a call from a very senior political figure in Bihar. And he called me and said, जयराम जी मैंने आपकी किताब पढ़ी है, बहुत अच्छा लिखा आपने, और मुझे जानकारी नहीं थी कि महाबोधि मंदिर का इतना बड़ा और लंबा इतिहास है और इसमें इतना कंट्रोवर्सी है. For 70 years there was an agitation. We are all aware of the Ayodhya agitation, the Ram Janma Bhoomi. But this was a Buddha Karma Bhoomi agitation. The Mahabodhi temple was for 400 years under the control of the Shaivite priests. And Edwin Arnold goes to Bodh Gaya in February of 1885, by which time this poem has been published. And he calls for the liberation of Bodh Gaya from the Shaivites. And he wants the international Buddhist community, the Tibetans, the Ceylonese, the Burmese, the Japanese, the Chinese, to have control over the place of Buddha's enlightenment. This creates a big controversy. This starts in 1885, and finally, this controversy is resolved only in 1953. And it is resolved in a typical Indian 50-50 way. 50% of the management will be Hindu, 50% will be Buddhist. So today if you go to Bodh Gaya, the Mahabodhi temple is not owned by the Buddhists. It's not owned by the Hindus. But there is a management committee of which the local district magistrate is the chairman. And there are, I think, 4 members now, or 5 members representing the Hindu community, and there are 4 or 5 members representing the Buddhist community. It's a typical Indian compromise solution. But for 70 years, this was a focal point of agitation. And even today, there are many Buddhist organizations, particularly the Ambedkarite Buddhist organizations, who are not very happy with this compromise solution. And I must tell you a very interesting episode that took place. The control of the Mahabodhi temple. I don't know how many of you have been to Bodh Gaya, but Mahabodhi temple in Bodh Gaya now is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. When the control of the Mahabodhi temple was shifted from the Shaivite Mahants to this management committee of Hindus and Buddhists, poem from the Light of Asia, verses from the Light of Asia were read out. So it's extraordinary, in 1953, people were remembering a poem published in 1879. That's a remarkable sort of, testimony to the enduring impact of this poem, and particularly on our modern thinking of the place of Bodh Gaya in the Buddhist cosmopolis.
Yes, testament to the poem as well as Edwin Arnold's initial efforts.
Yes, remember, all these Buddhist sites, whether it is Sanchi, whether it is Sarnath, whether it is Bodh Gaya, they all lay forgotten. And it's only in the late 19th century and the early part of the 20th century does these sites keep getting developed. I mean, take Orissa, for example. Orissa once upon a time was the citadel of Buddhism. Yes. And Lalitgiri, Udaygiri, all these great, Buddhist sites. Nalanda, another great example. Vikramshila, Odantapuri. These are all great sites associated with the teachings of the Buddha, but they lay in ruins when people had forgotten about it. It's only in the early part of the 20th century, with Lord Curzon, particularly when he was Viceroy, that the restoration of these works begin. And the Indian national movement, particularly Tagore, Gandhi, Nehru, and Rajendra Prasad, these were people who were deeply, deeply impacted by the life of the Buddha, and they supported the revival of the Buddhist heritage and the sites associated with Buddha. In fact, today, other than Lumbini, which is in Nepal, the other sites associated with Buddha, whether it's the site of enlightenment, which is Bodh Gaya, the site of Mahaparinirvana, which is Kushinagara, or which is the site of his first sermon, which is Sarnath, all lie in India. So it's become very much part of the Indian cultural system.
Talking of sites, there is a Jharkhand connection as well, which is mentioned in page 376 of your book. That would be interesting for our audience here. Yes, please.
Because I think this will interest our audience here. There's a section on Jharkhand in my book. And this is thanks to 2 people. Bulu Imam, a very well-known conservationist, heritage expert in Jharkhand, and Binoy Behel, who has written extensively on the Buddhist heritage. And let me read out a few lines, because they pertain to Ranchi and Hazaribagh. The Light of Asia also helped in the exploration of the Buddhist heritage of Hazaribagh district in Jharkhand in 2018. In 2018, this poem is published in 1879, but we are now talking of 2018. According to one tradition, Siddhartha Gautama traveled from Itkhori, now in the district of Hazaribagh, to Bodh Gaya, where he was transformed into being a Buddha. By river, this would be a distance of 30 kilometers, although the road distance is almost 4 times that long. The researchers and heritage recoverers, Binoy Behel and Bulu Imam, were alerted to this last journey of the Bodhisattva in book the sixth of the Light of Asia, which begins as follows. And these are the lines in the 1879 poem. Thou who wouldst see where dawned the light at last, northwestward from the 1,000 gardens grow. 1,000 gardens, remember this word, 1,000 gardens, Hazari Bagh. 1,000 gardens go by Ganga's valley till thy steps be set, on the green hills where those twin streamlets spring. Nilanjana and Mohana, the two rivers, follow them, winding beneath bread-leaved mahua trees. Mud thicket of the Sansar and the Bir, till on the plain the shining sisters meet. In Phalgu's bed, flowing by rocky banks, to Gaya and the red Barabar built hills. Hard by that river spreads a thorny waste, unraveling named in ancient days. The vital clues that Behl and Imam found in this verse are as follows. One, northwestward is the direction of Itkhori to Bodh Gaya. Itkhori in Hazaribagh district to Bodh Gaya, which is now part of Bihar. 1,000 gardens is literally Hazaribagh. Uruvelaya or Uruvela is the old name of Bodh Gaya. Using these clues, Imam and Behl discovered a treasure of Buddhist and Hindu sculptures in Bihari village close to Itkhori. The origin of the word Itkhori itself is explained by them thus. Tradition has it that Gautama's maternal aunt came looking for him in his period of meditation. When she could not find him, she said, Itikoi, Itikoi, which in Pali means I have lost him. It is said that this then became Itikori, a deeply revered site for Buddhists. This was not known till 2018. And it's only in 2018 that this great Buddhist heritage site was discovered, was developed. And I'm glad to say, I was speaking to Jayant Sinha, my friend who is the MP from Hazaribagh, and he informs me now that they are constructing a Buddhist museum in Hazaribagh based on all the discoveries and excavations that have been made, largely because of the reading of this epic poem published in 1879.
How utterly wonderful. And as you said, circular, right? Somehow we always seem to work that way. Coming back to the poem, there has been a lot of writing, a lot of research into why Edwin Arnold wrote this, what made him write it. But one of the perhaps simplest and most interesting explanations came from his son, Julian Arnold, about 40 years after the death of his father. He says that his father wrote this poem, and I quote, to unwind, and again I quote, uncurl his brain after he was consumed by his editorials on global politics and ongoing wars. Literary writing as a detox is basically what Julian Arnold says writing The Light of Asia was for Edwin Arnold. So I have to ask you this. Your book, The Light of Asia, the poem that defined the Buddha, the biography of the Light of Asia, was this a literary detox for you?
No. It's a good question. I wrote this book in the height of the COVID crisis. I researched this book when COVID was first wave. I wrote it during the second wave, and it got published just as the second wave was receding. No, it was not to uncurl my pain. It was not an emotional catharsis or as a source of emotional support. I wrote this book because I was interested in the life of the Buddha. As I said, I am not a Buddhist. I'm not a full follower of the Buddhist thought or Buddhist philosophy or Buddhist Sangha, but I'm deeply captivated and fascinated by the life of the Buddha. And for me, Buddha represents humanity. Buddha doesn't represent divinity. And I've said this before, and I don't mind saying it again. You know, India is a divinity surplus, humanity deficit country. We have far too much divinity in India and far less humanity. हमारे देश में देवत्व की कोई कमी नहीं है, पर इंसानियत की कमी है. और मेरे लिए गौतम बुद्ध इंसानियत के प्रतीक है, मानवता के एक प्रतीक है. और इसलिए मैंने ये किताब लिखा कि ये महाकाव्य से हमको जानकारी जो मिली है, भगवान, असली में मैं इनको भगवान बुद्ध नहीं कहूँगा, गौतम बुद्ध कहूँगा. जो गौतम बुद्ध के जीवन के बारे में जो हमें जानकारी मिली है, इस महाकाव्य से मिली है. और इसका अनुवाद जो हुआ है 13 या 14 भारतीय भाषाओं में. और आपको आश्चर्य होगा, 4 साल पहले भोजपुरी में इसका एक अनुवाद निकला है, भोजपुरी में. तो सारे भारतीय भाषाओं में इसका अनुवाद किया गया है. और जो हमारे मन में हमारी छवि है, जो हम मानते हैं गौतम बुद्ध के जीवन के बारे में, वो जानकारी हमें इसी महाकाव्य से हमने हासिल की है. तो मेरे लिए ये किताब लिखना कोई ऐसे भावनात्मक प्रयास नहीं था, बट इट वाज एन एफर्ट टू कम्युनिकेट टू पीपल how Buddha became the figure that he has become, and how Buddha became part of our lives, even though we may be Hindus, we may be Shaivites, we may be Vaishnavites, we may be Muslims, we may be Christians, whatever our faith. If there is one figure who represents India and Indian thought and Indian ethics, it really is Buddha. And the words we use, you know, as I said, ahimsa, nirvana, karuna, these are all things which are integral to what Buddha taught us.
Understood. This is a good point to open the floor to questions. We can take about 2 or 3 questions if there's anybody who wants to ask Mr. Ramesh anything. Is there anybody? Because the lights I can't see. Is there a volunteer? Is there somebody with a mic there, please?
Good evening, sir. Good evening, ma'am. My question to Jairam, sir. You said that Buddha, The Light of Asia, the poem which was published in 1879, brought Buddha to the world, and it kind of brought him back to the world, because the world had almost forgotten the great reformer, as you call him. My question is, sir, that is it really, in the present context, really that important to project Buddha as an independent reformer and not as someone who was trying to simplify the philosophy of Hinduism, which has existed from times immemorial and which does talk about the same divinity, the same karuna, the same, like there is even a shloka which is very similar. Like in Buddhism it is said that let happiness come to all, which is there, that sarve bhavantu sukhina. It's so similar, the ideas are so similar. So isn't Buddha an extension of the Hindu philosophy rather than an independent, like talking of him as someone not linked to the ancient glory?
Well, this is a debate that will never be settled. To the Buddhists, Buddha is an independent figure in his own right. To the Hindus, he is a Martin Luther. He's a reformer in the Hindu tradition, like Vardhamana Mahavira was, like others were. So I don't want to get into that. I mean, I'm not interested in that issue. But the important question that you have raised is that, is there a continuity in what Buddha taught and what Buddha preached? Or was there a discontinuity? There was a continuity in many ways, because he was, after all, born in the I wouldn't call the word Hindu. The word Hindu is a modern word. He was born in, in what was then considered to be the Vedic orthodoxy. But he challenged the Vedic orthodoxy, like Vardhamana Mahavira did, like the other Makkali Gosala and many others did in what was then Magadha and other parts of eastern India, not very far from here. They challenged the tenets of Vedic orthodoxy. And the two tenets of Vedic orthodoxy which was challenged, one was animal sacrifice, and the second one was the caste system. So there was a discontinuity there. So, whether he is an independent figure, whether he, argued for reformation of the existing school of thought, books have been written on this, and this is a never-ending argument. But I would like to I see Buddha really as in the tradition of people who have reformed social practices, who have reformed our ways of thinking. And he represents a school of thought which then continued and it was taken up by numerous other people. So it's an important question you have raised, but it's a question that takes us into a completely different, in fact, even the words Hinduism, the words Buddhism, these are all misnomers, Yeah. This word ism
do agree to that.
is the greatest disservice to ourselves. This ism is a Western concept.
Right.
It's not,
I do agree to that.
It's not an Indian concept.
Not at all.
The Indian philosophy has always been a crossover philosophy. You can be a Hindu, you can be a Buddhist, you can follow different traditions. But when Western thought came to dominate our thinking, we started thinking of Hinduism, we started thinking of Buddhism, we started talking of Jainism. Buddha never practiced Buddhism. Buddha never preached Buddhism. Vardhamana Mahavira never preached Jainism. He preached a way of thinking, a school of thought, which in the 19th century got, the title of an ism. I think one has to be a little careful with using these words and projecting them backwards.
Thank you for that very interesting answer. We have time for 2 more questions. Anybody else?
Good evening, sir. Sir, yo. So I just wanted to take a little turn from the conversation which is going through, and I would like to ask that you have done some part of your schooling from here, Ranchi, if I'm not wrong. Then what dynamics do you calibrate from here and the rest part of the world where you have been?
If I understand your question, you're asking that Sir spent some of his time in Ranchi,
Yes, ma'am.
and then of course has spent the rest of his life elsewhere. So what dynamics does he see as in a difference between Ranchi or
And other
Jharkhand and
places.
other parts of India? Again, a difficult question, young lady, but
Well,
so we'll take it.
it's always been a matter of mystery to me. And I've all been fascinated by this. At some point of time, I'd like to write about it. How all the great streams of Indian thought emanated from 200 kilometers radius here around Ranchi. It basically, Magadha, whether you talk of Mahavira, whether you talk of Gautama, you talk of Makkali Gosala, and you talk of the other schools of Indian philosophy, the reformist schools of Indian philosophy, they all came about in this part of the world. This was an extraordinary part of the world. And this is where social ferment and social revolution began, largely in the 6th century. All these great philosophies and all these great thinkers, all these great social reformers lived in this part of the world, round about the middle of the 6th century, early part of the 5th century. And I've always been fascinated why this is so. I still don't have a satisfactory answer. There are many theories. There are many theories that this was the arena where there was a clash between the Brahminical orthodoxy and the non-Brahminical sections of society who challenged Brahminical superiority. After all, Mahavira was born a Kshatriya. Gautama, Siddhartha was born a Kshatriya. but they preached caste equality. So, but the paradox is some of the earliest converts to Buddha were Brahmins themselves. So this is one of the great paradoxes. And it's something that we need to think about. How is it that 2000 years ago, 2500 years ago, this part of India, which covers modern day Bihar and modern day Jharkhand, how this part of India gave rise to so many different schools of thought and so many different philosophies which went into the making of modern day Hinduism.
Thank you for your question. Thank you for your answer.
Good
Time
evening.
for
Yes, sir. Good evening, sir. This side, just
okay.
behind the camera. Uh,
Yeah.
this side, yeah. अच्छा, मुझे आपसे पूछना था, आपने करुणा और मानवता की बात की, तो जब भी करुणा आती है, मानवता भी सरक पड़ती है। तो मैं आपसे पूछना चाहूँगी, जितनी भी धार्मिक संस्थाएं हुई या जो धर्म भारत में हमेशा से चलता आया है और हमेशा से हर देशों में भी चलता आया है, ये हमेशा करुणा, मानवता, धार्मिकता में क्यों बदल जाती है, सर?
ये कोरोना नहीं है, करुणा है।
करुणा कोरोना में भी बदल गई सर, कोरोना से करुणा भी हो गई।
नहीं, ये सोचने की बात है कि जब हम करुणा की बात कर, अहिंसा तो बिल्कुल, जब गांधी जी ने खुद लिखा है अपनी ऑटोबायोग्राफी में, काफ़ी कुछ लिखा है और उन्होंने कहा भी है कि अहिंसा जिसका प्रचार मैं करता रहता हूँ और अहिंसा की बात जो मैं करता रहता हूँ, मुझे मेरी जैन संप्रदाय से मैंने सीखा है, मेरी माँ से सीखा है, और मेरी माँ जैन संप्रदाय में विश्वास रखती थी। उन्होंने खुद लिखा है अपनी आत्मकहानी में। करुणा के बारे में जो मैंने कहा, कंपैशन जिसे कहते हैं, टॉलरेंस बड़ा नकारात्मक शब्द है। टॉलरेंस माने तुम जो करना है करो, मैं जो करूँगा मैं करते रहूँगा, और आप जियो मैं जीऊँगा, हम आपस में मिलजुल कर नहीं, कोई ताल्लुकात नहीं रहेंगे। पर करुणा थोड़ा सकारात्मक भावना है। करुणा की भावना जो है, हम आपस में हमारी ताल्लुकात रहेंगे, हमारे संबंध रहेंगे, मैं आपको समझने की कोशिश करूँगा, आप मुझे समझने की कोशिश करेंगे, और इससे करुणा की भावना बढ़ेगी। तो ये करुणा की भावना जो है, अगर आप भारत की इतिहास पढ़ें, भारतीय फिलॉसफी पढ़ें, तो ये करुणा हमारे बुद्ध संप्रदाय से आता है। मैं धर्म शब्द इस्तेमाल जानबूझकर नहीं कर रहा हूँ, क्योंकि धर्म का अनुवाद अंग्रेजी में रिलीजन करा जाता है। धर्म का माने रिलीजन नहीं है। धर्म एक ऐसा शब्द है जिसका अनुवाद किया ही नहीं जा सकता।
वेरी नाइस।
किया ही नहीं जा सकता, पर हम बार बार धर्म को रिलीजन के माफिक मानते हैं, बिल्कुल गलत है। तो जब मैं धर्म शब्द इस्तेमाल करता हूँ, एक अलग सा मेरे मन में एक नक्शा है धर्म के बारे में। ऐसे ही जब मैं करुणा का शब्द इस्तेमाल करता हूँ, करुणा की भावना के बारे में बात करता हूँ, काफ़ी कुछ सबूत है कि ये करुणा जो है, करुणा मानवता, अपने अपने जो भाई हैं बहन हैं उनके प्रति, जानवरों के प्रति, प्रकृति के प्रति, वो हमें ज़्यादातर विरासत में बौद्ध धर्म से मिला। पर यह बात सही है कि हमारे प्राचीन शास्त्रों में भी लिखा है प्रकृति रक्षति रक्षता। ऐसा देखा जाए संस्कृत में सब कुछ लिखा गया, प्रकृति रक्षति रक्षता, यानी कि प्रकृति आपकी रक्षा करेगी अगर आप प्रकृति की रक्षा करोगे। और ये बुद्ध ने भी कहा था। तो ये करुणा की भावना जो है, ये बहुत गहरा एक भावना है जो हमें समझने की कोशिश करनी चाहिए।
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Very nicely said.
Thank you for your question, and I think that is a wonderful way to end this session for today. And talking of Karuna, talking of the Buddha, talking of the life of Buddha, the light of Asia, the poem, Mr. Jairam Ramesh's book is available at the bookstore, should you want to pick up a copy and get it signed. Even if not, if you get it at your library, please do read it. You will be the richer for it. Thank you very much for being here.